These are two people that I love so much. I feel like I'm going to cry through this entire thing, so hopefully I will. Hopefully I won't. My name is Tammy, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 10th, 1995. So the last sobriety anniversary I celebrated was my 29-year sobriety anniversary, which is weird and strange and crazy. Like, 29 years, like, I didn't plan to stay this long, right? I just didn't. I came in at the age of 23. I was in a little bit of trouble. I wanted to get out of trouble and go on my merry little way. Thank you very much. And here we are, 29 years later. But I would like y'all to know that I'm really glad my plan didn't work out, and I'm glad that I stayed. I have a home group. My home group is the 12 and 12 study. We meet on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. in Asheville, North Carolina. If you're ever in Western North Carolina, come see us. My group is a book study group, and I'm a big fan of book study groups, and a bigger fan of book study groups is study the traditions, which is what we do over and over and over again. I think when we start our meeting or keep our meeting in a piece of Alcoholics Anonymous literature, we have a much better chance of staying in the solution. So I really appreciate a book study group. I have a sponsor, and lucky for me, she's in town and she's in the room today, so it is a treat for me to have her here, and I love you. I also am a sponsor in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and when you agree to say yes to sponsor somebody, you just never really quite know what you're going to get, right? And one time I ran into this girl, and she was new at the group, and I said hi, and I gave her my number, and she called, and she said, will you sponsor me? And I said, sure. So we met, and I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to work steps. And she said, okay. And so we started to work steps. And then I started to get these phone calls. The phone would ring, and I would answer, and she would say, Tammy. And I would say, yes, Erica. Oh, oops. Did I say your name out loud? Sorry. I would say, yes, Erica. And she'd say, Tammy, I just don't know if I'm an alcoholic. And I said, well, I don't know if you're an alcoholic either. That's not for me to say. That's for you to figure out and determine. And she says, okay. So then the phone would ring in, and she'd be like, Tammy. Yes, Erica. I just don't know if I'm an alcoholic. And I said, well, I really don't know either. It's something that you have to determine. I can't determine that for you. And she'd be like, okay. So then the phone rings. Tammy. Yes, Erica. I just don't know if I'm an alcoholic. And I said, well, I just don't know either. And she said, but I need to know what you think. I need to know what you think. And I said, okay, here's what I think. I think, based on the conversations that we've had and the work that we have done and the things that you have told me about your drinking, I think it is more likely than not that you belong in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she said, okay. That feels like it should be the end of the story, doesn't it? So the phone rings, and she says, Tammy. And I say, yes, Erica. And she said, when you say more likely than not, do you mean like 51% or 99%? I am like, I can't do this. I just can't do this, I just can't. So I said, look, here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to do this with you, okay? I'm just not going to do this with you. What we're going to do is we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to keep working steps. We're going to keep meeting. We're going to do the work. If in 6 months, when you get your 6-month sobriety chip, or however long it was, when you get your 6-month sobriety chip, if you want to ask me this question, you can. Until then, you can't. And she said, okay. And so we worked steps. We met and we worked steps and we did the deal and we went to meetings and we worked steps and we did everything. And the time came and the 6-month chip came. And I didn't get asked again if I thought she belonged or she wasn't asking me, those questions. And she stayed and she worked the steps. And as you heard, as of late, the last sobriety anniversary she celebrated was her 10-year sobriety anniversary, right? So you just never know what you're going to get, but it's always a fun ride. And I also learned we just don't bet on them, right? We just don't bet if they're going to stay or they're going to go, because we're never going to know. But anyway, and I'm a 3 legacy kind of girl. I love the steps, love the unity, love the service. Currently for service, what I'm doing is I am serving as the alternate DCM of District 70, Area 51, North Carolina. I am the alternate chair for our local Western North Carolina Central Office, and I am a volunteer at the local women's prison in Western North Carolina. And then, I just get involved in whatever else there is to get involved in or do. And I love to be of service to Alcoholics Anonymous. Before I go any further, I want to thank you all for having me here. Thank you for Melissa for the phone call and for the invitation. Kathleen, thank you for being a wonderful host chair and giving me lots of white cheddar popcorn. I love it. Patty, thank you for coming to pick me up at the airport and catching up and hosting me at your house so I could come in early and meet up with some people that I know and love and haven't seen in a long time. So thank you for that. Thank you, Erica, for hosting me and getting up at the podium. It's just been, this is great. Like, when I get a phone call that says, hey, can you come speak? My initial reaction is, I wish I could say no, right? But it was funny when Melissa reached out and said, can you come? I thought, oh my God, she's literally given me an invitation to come home to my friends, Because I spent the first 48 years of my life and the first 25 years of my sobriety in Southeast Texas. And coming back here is coming home. And the Texas State Convention holds a very special place in my heart. In 2004, somewhere around probably, April, May, June, because the conference was probably in June or July, whenever it is, I was breaking up out of a relationship and my heart was broken. And I had a group of people that was part of my home group down there who kept saying, hey, Tammy, you want to come to the state convention? And I was like, no, I don't want to go to the state convention. I hadn't gone. No, I don't want to go. And then they would say, hey, Tammy, you want to come to the state convention? And I said, no. And then one day my little heart was just hurting and breaking, and they reached out their hand and they said, Tammy, do you want to come to the state convention? And I said, yes, I'll go with you. And that was in 2004. And from 2004 until COVID happened and then I moved in 2019, I went to the Texas State Convention every single year for 15 years with friends that I knew and that I love. And so this convention holds a very special place in my heart. And so when I got the invitation, I was like, I get to go to a place that I love and I get to go see people that I love. And so it is really great to be here with you guys today. So one of the things, the big book is full of instructions, suggestions, things of that nature, but whenever I'm given an opportunity to share in this way, the instructions that really resonate with me are on page 29 in the big book. And it says, each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. I feel like for me, this whole journey has been about me establishing a relationship with God. So when I stopped drinking and got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 23. I learned about God from you. That's how I learned about God. At the age of 23, when I stopped drinking and got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't have a conception of God. So how does a 23-year-old end up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous when she doesn't even think she's an alcoholic, right? Yeah. So at the age of 23, on June 6, 1995, I became a drunk driver who killed somebody in a car accident. June 6, 1995. I was driving a brand new car that was 6 weeks old. I was driving too fast. I was driving a blackout. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I hit another vehicle. That vehicle had 4 people in it. There were 2 mothers and 2 daughters. One of the mothers died at the scene of the accident. The other mother and the 2 little girls were all life-flighted to the hospital. There are a couple things that I want to say about that day. When I got in my car that particular day for that particular trip, for that destination, I promise you I did not mean to do that. There was no part of me that meant to do that, that thought that even might happen. But what I have come to realize over the years and being able to get into a little bit of reality is if you had stood in front of me on June 6, 1995 and said, Tammy, you can't drive, you may kill yourself or kill somebody else, I would have looked at you and I would have said, move. You see, even though I thought I wasn't an alcoholic, what I know today is that at that time, the only thing that mattered to me was to go. I just needed to go. That's what I did when I drank. I started to drink. I drank just enough until I needed to go somewhere. It actually didn't matter where. It just needed to be somewhere other than here. And that's what happened that night. I had just enough to drink that I needed to go. And the thought of any person on the face of the earth beside myself and my need to go was non-existent. And so I went, right? But I didn't mean for that to happen. I did not mean to do that. As a result of that car accident, I was charged with 4 felonies. I was charged with 1 charge of intoxicated manslaughter and 3 charges of intoxicated assault. By the way, that accident happened on June 6, 1995, and I walked in here saying I'm not an alcoholic. So if I really wasn't an alcoholic, June 6, 1995 would have probably been enough for me to stop drinking. But my sobriety date is not June 6, 1995. My sobriety date is December 10th, 1995, because I wasn't done. I wasn't done. I was drunk the next week. I was drunk the next week with the excuse of, do you know what I'm about to have to go through? Poor, pitiful me, right? So we go on. I pled guilty to those 4 charges in October of 1995. I got sentenced to a whole host of things. By today's standards, it's probably very, very light. All 4 sentences ran concurrent, and I got 10 years of probation. I had to go to a place called a Safe-P, which they told me was treatment. And then I had to go to a halfway house, and then I had to go to outpatient, and then I had to go to AA, and I had to do 500 hours of community service. I had to pay back $16,000 in restitution to the families that were injured. I had to do this, do that, the other, all these things. I had to have a breathalyzer installed in my car for the entire term of my probation, XYZ. But after it was all said and done, and I said, okay, I'm going to plead guilty to these charges and make this deal, I just went, whew, thank God they're not sending me to prison, right? Little did I know, but, and so off we go. So I pled guilty to those 4 charges and got sentenced in October 13th, 1995, which, by the way, is also not my sobriety date. My sobriety date is December 10th, 1995, because I wasn't done yet. You know, anybody who's not really an alcoholic, it would have been enough. It would have been enough. The consequences of my drinking would have been awful, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough yet. So the last time I drank was December 9th, 1995. I went to a party. I remember just enough of it to know I don't ever want to see that girl again. I don't know what your drinking looked like, but my drinking looked like I hope I never see that girl again, okay? That's what mine looked like. So the conditions of my probation let me stay out for a couple of months. And then in January of 1996, I had to turn myself into county jail. So I turned myself into county jail. I did set my timer. I turned myself into county jail in January of 1996, and I went into county jail with a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some nice person that I knew I was going in and knew why, and they said, why don't you take this with you? And I said, okay, whatever. So I took this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous into county jail with me. I was there for 2 weeks, and over the course of those 2 weeks, I somehow, some way, at some point, opened it up and found the steps. I don't even remember how all that happened or why it happened, but at some point I did. So here's what Tammy's read of the 12 steps in January of 1996 with a couple of weeks sober, a couple of weeks without drinking, no program, thinking I'm probably not an alcoholic, just have to get through all this, right? So I'm reading the steps, and step 1 says, powerless, unmanageable. So I think about my life, and I look around my jail cell, and I say, I think I'm doing okay. I don't think that one applies. So then we go into steps 2 and 3, and steps 2 and 3 start talking about God. Oh my, we're not going to go there. Okay? Look, I was made to go to church when I was little, didn't want anything to do with it. By that point in my life, I was done with all of it, and I'm not going to talk about it again. So we're skipping 2 and 3, right? 4 and 5 start talking about taking a personal inventory and sharing it with somebody. This is ridiculous, okay? We're not doing those. 6 and 7 start talking about character defects, and I couldn't find any, and so I said those must not apply to me either. And then I got to steps 8 and 9. Now, I just told you a story of, a horrific incident where there were a lot of amends owed. But when I'm reading the steps in county jail, a couple of minutes sober with, no foundation, when I read steps 8 and 9, I was like, those are great. Those are great. I was like, I should probably write some amends letters to my parents and tell them I'm sorry for all the trouble. And so I did. Steps 8 and 9, amends letters from jail to your parents to tell them that you're sorry for all the trouble you put them through, right? So if you are new, please take note. This is the part of the story. This is not how Alcoholics Anonymous works. This is not how you want to do the program, okay? So off we go. Eventually, they come get me to take me to this place called SAFP, which they told me was treatment. What it actually is TDC. It is prison in the state of Texas. They gave me my TDC whites, they gave me my TDC boots, they gave me my TDC number, they gave me my TDC bunk, they gave me my mailing address, how to get visitors. I went to work, I had to go to work every day because I had an education, so I couldn't go to school. So I went to work every day, went to groups for half the day, did all of that. I would love to tell you it was a great experience. It was not. You know what I've come to realize, though, is that I don't think that they mean for prison to be a great experience. So it worked for me, you know, like it worked. It's like, I don't want to go back there. So they eventually let me out because they have to, right? They have to. And so they eventually let me out. And then I started doing all the things that I was supposed to do. I had this list of conditions of my probation, you know, these things that I have to do. So I go to the halfway house, and then I get out of the halfway house and I go back home and I start going to my outpatient meetings. I start going to AA because I'm court ordered to go 3 times a week. So I go 3 times a week, right? I start doing my community service. I have a job because I have to pay back the $16,000 in restitution and all of these, you know, legal fines and fees and whatnot. I have this breathalyzer installed in my car, and I start doing all of these things, and I'm busy, right? So I'm going to AA, but the real intent of going to AA is to get the paper signed, to take the paper signed to the probation officer so I don't get in trouble, right? I go to the meeting. I'm not disruptive. The people were nice enough, right? But not nice enough for me to want to hang out with after, you know? I had a mission. I had a purpose in being there. And so I'm doing everything that I need to do. And my mom lives down the street. My dad lives down the street. My sister lives down the street. I had met a man who was my soulmate, and we're happy and we're together. And I'm busy, okay? I'm busy. And everything is fine. Everything's fine, right? So I don't know if you heard what I wasn't doing during those years. And what I was not doing during those years was participating in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't actively seeking and working steps. I wasn't actively seeking a relationship with a higher power. I wasn't building that foundation that you guys talk about, that our book talks about. I wasn't doing any of that. I was busy and I was fine. And that kept me okay until I was 5 years sober. And when I was 5 years sober, my whole little world kind of fell apart. My whole little support system and everything that I was doing and all of this stuff just kind of fell apart all in the same year. And because it fell apart and I didn't have a program, I kind of fell apart, you know? I didn't fall apart so much that I drank again, but I fell apart just enough that I became desperate and in pain enough that I said, oh my God, I know what these people have been talking about all these years. This is it. That life is going to happen, and that I'm going to need a foundation so that I can be okay. And I had not built that, so I didn't feel okay. But I was finally desperate and in enough pain that I reached out my hand to another woman and I said, will you be my sponsor? And she said yes. And we started working the steps. And we started with 1, not 8 and 9. So this is a better path to follow here, not that first one. So we started with 1, and by this time, even though I hadn't been fully participating in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had listened to enough of your stories. I knew that my drinking wasn't normal, and I knew I belonged. So this time, when we look at the steps, they look very different. So we look at powerless, unmanageable, and at this point, it's just slapping me in the face how obvious it is, right? I don't know, most 23-year-olds aren't convicted of 4 felonies and have to quit their job and wreck 6-week-old brand new cars and go to prison, and, it's just not normal. But even outside of that chaos, my drinking was not normal. I got drunk the first time when I was 17. After that, it progressed very rapidly. Within the next 2 or 3 years, I was a weekend warrior. Within the few years after that, I was drinking in between. And by the time I was 22, 23, I was drinking on a daily basis. I was drinking every day. I drank on days that I said I didn't want to. I drank on days when I didn't want to, or I said I wasn't going to, and I did it anyway. My work schedule was arranged around me being able to drink how I wanted to drink. The people that I hung out with drank like me, so it didn't feel abnormal, right? But when I look back, it is very clear to me that none of that was young 20-year-old drinking. That was alcoholic drinking. And between 17 and 23, I had progressed into a full-blown daily drinker. And the repercussions of my drinking were 4 felonies and a woman who died because of my actions. That's where my alcoholism took me. Steps 2 and 3 start talking about God, and the reading was all about my belief about this. It's about, I drug in a whole bunch of preconceived ideas and preconceived notions of God. And they came from when I was a little girl and my parents made me go to Catholic church. And I come into AA all these years later, and you start talking about God, and that's what I think you mean. That's not what you said. That's what I think that you mean. And so the idea that AA says I can choose my own conception of God, that it doesn't have to be yours or yours or yours or anybody else's, it can be mine, is monumental to me. And my idea of God has changed over the years, It started out by me even recognizing the presence of God through coincidence, right? Well, that's odd. Isn't that odd? That's strange, right? Too many strange things happen. And then being willing to do the work to build that relationship and grow that relationship and find my own conception of God. Steps 4 and 5, doing the inventory. Whatever. It's not that bad if you haven't done it. But what I love about step 5 is the concept of, we just read it in the 12 and 12 the other night. It talks about how one of the gifts is that sense of isolation is gone. And for me, that's what it is. For me, sitting down with another alcoholic and sharing things that are very personal. Did this go out or is it me? It's good? Did it say? Okay, so I'm so sorry. I'm just super distracted. Anyway, the idea of me sitting across from another woman and sharing these things and we nod, right? It is that sense of understanding that makes me go, oh, I'm not alone. I am not alone. And that's where that sense of isolation gets lifted, that other people know how I feel, other people understand what I've done, and I am in the right place, And then steps 6 and 7 come up, and somewhere along the way between the first read of 6 and 7 and this read, I found a whole lot of character defects. I don't know where they came from, but they just all appeared, right? And there they are. And I love the 7-step prayer in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, because it doesn't say, God is going to remove. The 7-step prayer says, God, have all of me, good and bad, right? And for me, that's an important prayer, because I want to say, here's what's good and bad, God. Here's what you should take, God, right? And that prayer tells me that I say, have all of me, good and bad. And then the action is up to me, and the outcome, accepting the outcome, is up to me, right? So I love that prayer. And I would love to say that, after 29 years sober, every character defect I've ever had in my whole entire life has been lifted and removed, and it's gone, but I probably shouldn't lie from the podium. So that's not true. Those little suckers still come up, right? And there they are. But and then we get to steps 8 and 9. So at this time, I wasn't ready, but when I was 6.5 years sober, I had been toying with, that's not what I mean. I had always known that there were amends owed to these families that I injured in this car accident. There were 2 families in the car, and there was an 18-wheeler truck driver who got involved and hit me and whatever. And I always knew there was some amends owed. But for the longest time, the thought of making amends to any of these people almost made me physically sick to think about it. I just couldn't. I just could not do it, right? And when I was 6.5 years sober, I went to a meeting. The topic was steps 8 and 9, and I heard exactly what I needed to hear at exactly the right time. And I said, okay, God, I heard you. I'm ready, okay? And so I went home and I found everybody's phone number, and I made these amends. So the first person that I called was the husband of the woman who died in the car accident. Now, I got their phone number. It's 7 years later. I'm 6.5 years sober. It's 7 years later. I got their phone number off the police report. And I thought it's 7 years later. Everybody's probably changed their number. I was probably hoping everybody changed their number, right? So I called the household of the woman who died in the car accident, and a man answered the phone. And I asked for him, and he said it was him. And I said, my name is Tammy Skyby, and I don't know if you know who I am. And he said, I know who you are. Of course he knew who I was. It's ridiculous. This is... Right about now, I always wish I could tell you a story of a beautiful amends I made to this man, but the reality is I started to cry, and then I started to sob. I did manage to get out to him how sorry I was for my actions and how they had impacted his family. And don't misunderstand, I am very aware that my actions and how they impacted his family, and I am sorry over the phone, is woefully inadequate. I'm very aware of that. But it's all I had right then. I managed to tell him how sorry I was for my actions. I told him I hadn't drank in a while. I said my life is different. He told me that he missed his wife, and he said his little girl missed her mom. He said that his little girl's injuries were very bad and it took a long time. He said he didn't understand why any of it happened. But at the end of that conversation, what he said to me is, I forgive you. I completely did not understand that at that time. Completely. I probably would have done better if he would have cussed me out and slammed the phone down and said, don't you ever call my house again. That makes sense to me. You being angry and resentful at me makes sense to me. Your forgiveness of me does not make sense to me. How could you? Why would you? Right? I proceeded to make some more phone calls. I couldn't get in touch with the other family. I did get in touch with the truck driver and made amends to him and whatnot. And after I made those phone calls, I started to send Christmas cards to the family of the woman who died in the car accident and to the truck driver. And when I was 9 years sober, I got a Christmas card in the mail, and I didn't recognize the address. And I opened it, and some little red and green confetti fell out, and it was from that little girl. And it said, Merry Christmas to you and your family. If I was 9 years sober, she was, I think, 6 when the accident happened. So she would have been, I don't know, I'm going to get my dates all mixed up, but she would have been, 12, 15, something like that. I thought it may be a mistake, right? You know how sometimes you get a Christmas card and you just send one back, and I thought maybe that happened. But the next year I sent her a Christmas card, and she sent me a Christmas card back. And over the course of the next probably 6 or 8 years, I sent Christmas cards and got a Christmas card back from that little girl every year. And she shared some of her life with me. She told me that her dad was her hero because he's a hardworking man. She told me she missed her mom. She told me that she was graduating from high school, and then she was graduating from college. She met a nice young man, and she was going to get married. She told me that the reason that she and her dad were so forgiving is because that's what their mother showed them through her actions, was to be a forgiving person. The last Christmas card I ever got from that little girl was several years ago now. And she sent a little business card with a little inspirational saying on it. And she said in her message, she said, when I was little, my mom used to take me to the mall, and we would get inspirational cards printed, and we would hand them out throughout the year. And she said, now I'm doing that to honor my mother. And she said, I want you to have one. I want you to have one of these inspirational cards, and whatever it means to you, may it bring you comfort, right? So I will tell you, I did not deserve that. Years of this little girl sharing her life with me, their forgiveness of me, right? You know, What I've come to realize, though, is that when I was 6.5 years sober and I made that phone call, I didn't even understand what forgiveness was. I didn't even understand what it was. That's why I couldn't understand how they could, right? But what I've come to realize is what they showed me is the line in the big book that says we cannot hold on to hate and anger or resentment and walk in the sunlight of the Spirit. That's what they showed me. They showed me that whatever their belief is, they have a belief. And they knew that they couldn't be angry or resentful at me and walk in their own sunlight of the Spirit. And so they chose to forgive me, right? And what that made me realize is they didn't forgive me for me. They forgave me for them. They forgave me before I ever picked up the phone. And they forgave me if I would have never picked up the phone, right? That their forgiveness of me had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with them. And that's what our big book says to me. And I want to talk about walking in the sunlight of the Spirit, right? And then, you fast forward a little bit, like how do I forgive me for that, right? The promises talk about how we won't regret the past or wish to shut the door on it. And I thought, well, that's cute for you, but that's not going to happen for me. I mean, did you hear what I just said? I did. Like, how can I do that and be okay with it? That just doesn't make sense, right? But it's no different. It's just really no different. And what I found is that the steps of this program and working them and living them, that it can happen. And I want to make sure that you understand what I mean for me when I say that there has been some level of me being able to forgive me for my actions. What it means is I am not saying that what I did was okay. I'm not trying to say it's right. I'm not trying to say I would do it again if I could. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is that I can't take it back. I cannot undo it. There is no amount of willing, wishing, praying, anything that will ever bring that woman back. Ever. Okay? I can't take it back. What I'm saying is, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with it? It tells me somewhere in the book that our past becomes our greatest asset, right? So what am I going to do with it? I get an opportunity. Sometimes to do something really good with it. And the best thing I can ever think about that I can do with it is share it with another alcoholic, to say that, we do a lot of things and we can get sober and we can stay sober, right? And so, surprisingly to me, those things do happen if I just stay and do the work and take the action. So then we move on to step 10. In step 10, we rinse and repeat. We do everything we just did, and we just keep doing it, right? And step 11, we keep seeking God and keep seeking the relationship with God. And then in step 12, I practice the principles and pass it on, and then we just do it, right? And then I work it, I live it, I do it. That's what I'm supposed to do, right? So what I want to do now is tell you how that's culminated in my life. How has all that culminated in my life being different? So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about how God works in my life. In December of 2014, I got a phone call from this young man, and he said, "Hey, we're having a conference. We'd like for you to come speak." And I looked at my calendar and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I already have a commitment on that Saturday night. I'm not going to be able to be there." And he said, "No problem. We'll get you some other time." And then for some reason, I got off the phone and I really looked at my calendar, and that young man in December 2014 had called and asked me to speak at their conference on June 6th, 2015, which would be the 20-year anniversary of that woman's death, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever had that feeling, that feeling of, it's God, okay? It's just God. And I just couldn't shake it. I couldn't wash it off. I couldn't scrub it off. I couldn't shake it off, right? I just couldn't get rid of it. And I said, I think I made a mistake. So I called that young man, and that's what I said. I said, I think I made a mistake. I said, I told you that I couldn't come. I said, and I have something to do, but I think I'm supposed to get rid of it. And I did. I said, am I still invited? He said, we would love to have you. And so I got rid of what I was going to be doing that Saturday night, and on June 6, 2015, I was in the state of Louisiana talking to the Louisiana State Young People's Conference, of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was the speaker on June 6th. It was a 3-day conference. It was June 5th, June 6th, and June 7th. He didn't invite me for the 5th, nor did he invite me for the 7th. He invited me for the 6th. And so on June 6, 2015, on the 20-year anniversary of that woman's death, I was telling her story. I was telling their story to a room very similar to this of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I will tell you, I don't think there's any way I could better honor her life than to tell her story. After I finished talking, this young man came up to me and he said, "Thank you." He said, "Hey, I know a girl back in Houston who shares some of your story. Can I give her your number?" And I said, "Of course." And I don't know how many times you've given your number out, but I've given my number out a gazillion times, and my phone doesn't ring that much. And so off we go, and I get a phone call from this girl. And the similarities in our stories are amazing. I was 23, she was 20. My accident happened on June 6th. Hers happened on June 7th, like 20 years later. And so we were both, it was just uncanny. She had already pled guilty to her charges, and she was awaiting her sentencing. And I agreed to go pick her up because she couldn't drive, and I took her to dinner, and we talked. And then she got sentenced. She got sentenced to 6 years in TDC. She went in, I guess it would have been in January of 2016, she went into TDC and did 6 years. And over the course of that time, I got in touch with her and I started writing her letters. We would share our June 6th and June 7th anniversaries with one another. I eventually got on her visitation list, and I would go see her about once a quarter. After 3 years, she was up for parole, and they denied her at 4 years, and they denied her at 5 years, and she did all 6 years of her sentence. And I kept in touch with her over the course of that. She was released in January of 2022, and she came back home to Houston. She lives around here. And so instead of writing letters or going to see her or JPay or whatever it is, we get to talk on the phone and we get to text. And that young lady is still sober, and I got to have dinner with her on Thursday night when I came in early. So I'm going to rewind that story. That story started out with me getting a phone call in December of 2014 and me saying no. But that story is me learning how to hear the voice of God, who says you're supposed to be there. And so when I said yes, I didn't just get to honor that woman. I got to honor that woman, and I got a relationship with this young woman whose story and mine are so similar, it's uncanny, right? And I get to watch her now that she's out, grow and learn and do AA out here. And it is a gift that I would have missed, And so I am really grateful that I at least learn how to listen to God sometimes. I would love to say all the time, but I might be lying from the podium again. So in June of 2018, so every year June 6th happens. You guys know this, right? Of course. So June 6th of every year, I always wake up and I know it's June 6th. And I say a little bit of special, acknowledgement of what day it is and, acknowledge the families and whatnot. And then I go about my day, and I always try to do something to be of service to Alcoholics Anonymous. But for many, many, many years, at the end of the day on June 6th, I would come home, and I would just feel like I hadn't done enough. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, but whatever it was, I missed it, and it never felt like it was enough. In 2018, I talked to my sponsor a week or two before June 6th, and I said, hey, I just want to talk about this. And so we talked about it a little bit, and we talked about making amends, and she said, have you made amends? And I said, I've made amends. And she said, well, an amends is an action, and you've done it. She said, now what we do is we practice right living. And I was like, oh. And there was just something about that really just kind of changed my perspective a little bit. On June 6, 2018, it was the 23-year anniversary of that woman's death, of that car accident. I had a commitment on the first Wednesday of the month to go to Plain State Jail. And I went to Plain State Jail with my writing buddy on June 6, 2018. I chaired the meeting. I talked about the promises. I told them why that day was important to me, what I had done, and shared a little bit of that with those women in Plain State Jail on June 6, 2018. At the end of that meeting, this young woman came up to me. I never saw her at the AA meeting at Plain State Jail before, and I never saw her again at the meeting of Plain State Jail after. I do remember she was a youngish blonde girl with like curlyish hair. And she came up to me after the meeting and she said, "I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for sharing your story." She said, "I've done that too, and I needed to hear what you had to say." That's what she said. I'm going to now tell you what I heard. What I heard was, "Tammy, it's enough. You're doing everything that I want you to do. You're staying sober. You're being of service to Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything that you were doing on this day is enough." And to me, on June 6, 2018, God showed up in the form of a young, blonde, curly-headed girl to tell me it was okay, you know? And I realized shortly thereafter, you know, I feel like alcoholism for me is it's an illness of more, right? How much is enough? More. That's how much is enough, right? It's never enough. It's never enough. It's never enough. And I feel like after that, I got that message. I felt like I finally realized that I have enough of everything. I don't need more. Will I take another friend? Will I take more love? Will I take a promotion at work? Sure, right? But I don't need any more. I have enough of everything, right? And you know how that happens? That happens through staying sober, working the steps, living the steps. It's incredible. I did have a moment this year, though, where I thought, you know, wouldn't it be nice if those kind of things happened and they just stayed forever and they never came back? Like, those character defects disappeared and never came back, or those things never came back. But I had a weird moment earlier this year. I'm considering retiring at the end of this year. And I was talking to my financial advisor, and we're talking about it, and, you know, I'm saying, you know, I'm thinking, you know, yeah, I know how much money I need, and he says, "You're going to be fine." And I said, "Yeah, but," and he, but, and he said, you're going to be fine." And I said, "Well, yeah, but, you know," and he said, "I know, I get it, it's never enough." And I said, "What?" And I remember getting off the phone and having a moment where I was like, "Oh my God, I have enough. It's okay. It's going to be okay," right? Anyway, so in 2020, so I lived the first 48 years of my life, the first 25 years of my sobriety in Southeast Texas, and you know, this is like homecoming for me, right? But I always had this idea that I was going to move one day. And I wanted to move a little north and a little east, and so I had kind of picked out some ideas. And then 2020 happened, and COVID, you know, changes everybody's world a little bit, and my job became remote. And when my job became remote, they said, "You can live wherever you want." And I said, "Well, son of a gun, I don't have to wait till I retire. I can move now, right?" And so I started kind of going down that path, and I took a trip. I decided where I wanted to go. And what happened is I did that, and my job was remote, and this job was the mecca of my career. This was the pinnacle of my career. I had arrived, you know, everything, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was going to take this job with me to North Carolina. And between the time that I decided where I was going to go and I moved, my job got shaky, okay? And I got a little bit of fear going on that, oh my God, I'm about to sell my house, pack up my belongings, pack up my cats, move thousands of miles away, and I'm going to get fired from my job, and that would be awful. And so what I found happened, though, is God opened a door for me, you know? God opened a door. And somebody just said recently from the podium here earlier, you know, that you need a neon flashing sign. And I felt like God didn't crack the door, you know. God like opened the door wide and said, "What are you going to do?" And so I said, "You know what? I'm just going to step through. I'm going to step through." So I sold my house. I packed up my belongings, packed up my cats, said, "I love you" to everybody in Southeast Texas. And I drove thousands of miles to Western North Carolina. 6 months later, I quit my job. So I didn't get fired, but I did quit my job, which I thought was going to be the worst thing ever. But actually what happened is I spent the next 5 months not working. I discovered that I love hiking. The weather there is phenomenal. I would just sit on my front porch and read or have lunch. I found, volunteer activities, things to do, et cetera, and I was living my best life. And I thought me losing my job when I moved would be the worst thing ever, and it was the best thing ever because that job was not good for me. So I got a call, and I'm gainfully employed again, but I just told you I'm thinking about quitting again, so we'll see how that goes. But that's how I ended up in Western North Carolina, and I have to tell you, I think I belong there, I belong there. I am so happy there. I love the people in Southeast Texas, but I'm so happy in Western North Carolina. So I'm going to tell you another quick story. I had written something down, but I left it somewhere. So in February of 2022, I turned 50, and I already lived in Western North Carolina. And I had made a plan with this friend of mine to have a Zoom call, and we were just going to talk, right? So it's the day before my 50th birthday, and I get on the phone with her to have this Zoom call. And when I get on this Zoom call, there's several people there. And I'm like, what are all these people doing here, right? And so a friend of mine had organized a surprise 50th birthday party for me on Zoom. And so I have this surprise 50th birthday party on Zoom with people that I know and people that I have to tell you, I think actually everybody who was on that Zoom call, or almost everybody who was on that Zoom call, is in this room today. Those are the people that I know and that I love, right? And I think what happens when I get sober and I work the steps and I stay sober and I live the steps is I can't see the incremental changes in my life clearly because they just happen kind of slowly, right? But I remember on that surprise 50th birthday party, seeing those people that I had known for 25 years, people that I'd known for 20 years, people that I'd known for 10 years, right? In the 12 and 12, it talks about, and I wrote it down to not misquote it, but I lost it, and so I'm going to misquote it. So it says something about, that we have an inability to form a true partnership with another human being, right? And it was a very distinct moment for me when I said, I have formed true relationships with other human beings that have lasted decades that these people I have known and loved, and they showed up to tell me happy 50th birthday, right? And it was such a beautiful, beautiful moment for me to see that and to know that had happened in my life. I'm going to tell you one last quick story, and I actually think I'm not going to go over time. It looks like I might be under time, but I'm going to tell you a story, something that happened this year. So I'm in Western North Carolina, and so my journey of finding a higher power, seeking the relationship with God and all of that has taken, it's constantly transforming, right? So my idea of God when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous was the one that was impressed upon me as a child. And when I was a child, I was made to go to Catholic Church. I will tell you, I hated everything about Catholic Church when I was a little girl. I didn't like the rituals, I didn't like the readings, I didn't like any of it, but I was made to go, and I hated all of it. I didn't feel the presence of God. I didn't know what we were doing there. I just wanted to not be there. Lucky for me, my parents got divorced, and when you're Catholic and you get divorced, you're not so welcome at the Catholic Church, so then I don't have to go to Catholic Church anymore, right? Yay, me. So then we just boogie along, right? And I just grow up, and I probably became an agnostic if I had to define it. So I probably became an agnostic. I just hooey. I don't care about any of it, right? Whatever. And then I end up with you guys, right? And what do you start talking to me about? You start talking to me about God. And, and at first I balked because I have all these preconceived ideas, preconceived notions. I went to Catholic Church. God isn't there. Whatever, right? So you start talking to me about this. But what I love about step 2 is this whole concept of open-mindedness. Just crack the door, just open the door, just maybe choose your own conception of God, right? All of this latitude that you give me to build that relationship that's mine, not anybody else's. So over the course of the last 29 years, it's been a journey, and it changes and it grows and it morphs. And there were years where I wouldn't even go into a church, and then I was like, yeah, whatever, that's stupid. But so I could go into a church with, no problem. But, and it's just changed and it's just grown. And I've come to just have a conception of God that's mine, right? It's not defined by anything. So earlier this year, my boyfriend had a childhood friend whose mother died, and so he wanted to go to the funeral, and I said, I'll go with you. And he said, it's a Catholic funeral, and I said, ooh. They're like, ooh. Ooh. Okay, okay. So look, we go to this Catholic funeral, and I know exactly what is going to happen at this Catholic funeral. Because even though it had been a very, very long time since I was a little girl in Catholic church, I knew exactly what was going to happen. People were going to genuflect, and we were going to make the sign of the cross, and we were going to sit, kneel, stand, sit, kneel, stand, sit, kneel, stand, and we were going to read, and we were going to sing, and we were going to whatever, have the incense. I knew what was going to happen. I knew it, right? And I was ready. Fine, I can sit through this. I'm a big girl, right? So we go, and we get there, and it's a very small service for this woman, just, 20, 40 people, whatever it was. So we're at this Catholic church, and I'm just waiting for the priest to start talking and make me feel like I'm going to go to hell, and whatever, right? So I'm sitting here, and this priest starts talking, and he's talking to us like we're just people. And he's explaining to us in a very understandable way how Christians feel about death, why it's not sad, all of the truths. And I'm just really intently into this priest, I am like, this is some great stuff that he is talking about here. I'm like, this is amazing, right? Wow. And then they do communion, because Catholics do communion. I'm not going to, yeah. He says, we're going to have communion. He said, if you don't want to take communion, but you would like a blessing, please come up and cross your arms in front of you, and I'll give you a blessing. And I said, I want a blessing. Like this priest is like speaking to my heart, you know what I mean? I'm like, this guy's great. I was like, I want a blessing. And so the people go to get communion, and I go get in line, and I cross my hands in front of me, and I'm going to start crying. So I cross my arms, and he looks at me kind of surprised, because maybe most people don't do that, but he offered, so I crossed my arms, and he looks at me a little surprised, and he just put his hand on my shoulder, and he mumbled something. I have no clue what he said, right? But he just mumbled, some kind of prayer or whatever, and I walked off, and I went back, and I wanted to just cry and sob, right? And I felt the presence of God in a Catholic church. I would have told you God doesn't live there, right? Because I'd been there, and God doesn't live there for me. But 29 years later, I'm in a Catholic church at a funeral, and I'm open-minded enough to sit there, and I felt the presence of God in that place. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. Now, don't misunderstand. I have no desire to go to Catholic church. That is not the point of the story. The point of the story is that there are these amazing steps that you guys have given me, right? And you've given me the opportunity to work them with others, and you've given me the opportunity to live them in my life, and you've given me an opportunity to listen to you and let me share with you. And I've become a seeker, right? And I've become open-minded. And I think when I do that, God is everywhere, right? Not just here or just there. He's anywhere, even in Catholic church for me, right? So I'm going to close real quick. So this is what I love. It's the last paragraph of the doctor's opinion. And it says, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to stay. And when I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 23, just because I got in trouble, I was not here to stay. I was here to scoff. I was here to say, you can have your little God, thank you very much, I don't need that. And I will tell you that 29 years later, thank you. And I am so grateful that I stayed, and I hope you guys stay. And thank you so much for having me today.